A message from our sponsor, Ramp Stop Marine Service. Ramp Stop Marine Service is a family-owned and operated boat store located at mile marker 757 on the Ohio River. Since 2005, their mission has been to support and encourage the inland mariner by providing midstream delivery services on the Ohio River from Louisville to Cairo and the Mississippi from Hickman to Cape Girardeau. By operating their own grocery store and supply warehouse tailored to the needs of vessels operating on our inland rivers, they can provide you with what your boats and crews need to keep moving. Ramp Stop has also begun working with launch services and midstream fuelers on the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. So next time you talk with your launch service or midstream fueler, ask if they can provide you with groceries from Ramp Stop Marine Service. Check them out on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, or visit www.rampstop.com. Welcome back to Between the Levees. I am joined today by James Edwards, a pilot on the Captain Dan Thomas. It runs on the Illinois, the Ohio, some on the lower. We'll get into all that. But first of all, Captain James, thank you for joining me.
Not a problem. Glad to be here.
I appreciate your time this afternoon. Please, as these all begin, tell me, where were you born?
Born in Dothan, Alabama. It's the southeast corner of Alabama, just north of Panama City, Florida. Spent a lot of time in both places. That's where I've been most of my life. I've moved around. I consider Panama City my home as well, and lived in Houston for a while and a couple other places, but moved back here just a few years ago and ended up working for ACBL afterwards.
What did your parents do for a living?
My father's been in a lot of different businesses. He actually started out in the trucking industry and owning a trucking company by the time I was in high school. Actually ended up working for him for a while. But most recently, he's actually shifted again. He's one of those guys that's good at a little bit of everything. He just, older in life, and he always wanted to get a commercial pilot's license. So he did. And now he flies for several different people professionally. And on his other hand, he was most recently the project manager for Quantic Engineering, working on some of the ships and things they were building for Eastern Shipyard. I believe the most recent project he was working on were the Staten Island ferries, actually. So I actually got to go there and watch the launch of one of those, and that was great. So I've always been very much around the maritime industry. He came up running dive boats and everything else. He had a sailboat. So he had us naturally in the water at a young age.
What about your mom?
Mom, she supported him quite a bit. She worked with him at the trucking company for many years, and then decided that it was time to be a stay-at-home mom. I had a brother and a sister, and I think we were all a handful, so it worked better if she came home, and definitely was a homemaker for a while.
What kind of trucking business was you running?
Flatbeds, usually heavy freight flatbeds, any kind of specialty stuff. Not entirely sure the whole broad range of it, but it was just about everything you could imagine you could put on a flatbed. And he had, I believe at one time, I think they were servicing 84 owner operators. It was quite a few. I think he owned a few of the trucks as well. And at the economic downturn, it just kind of, it was harder. He was still considered a smaller trucking company, so it was hard on everybody, and he just had to let that one go eventually.
Well, what was life growing up in Dothan, or I guess all around down there?
It's not a bad place. I mean, obviously I came back, but it was I went to a little school called Rehoboth, and I don't think I would have traded it for anything. It's one of those towns. It's not too big. It's not too small. It's in fact, one of the funniest things is I think a lot of the guys around here, they get into this mindset that it's a small town. They got to get out. And me, now that I've traveled the United States quite a bit, at least, the upper Midwest and everywhere else in the East Coast, everything, Dothan's not a small town. I've been to small towns. There's a lot smaller places to be. Dothan, I feel like, is a good balance. It's not necessarily a destination place, but it is a decent place. Everything's kind of decent living, good people around. And that's kind of why I gravitated back here for at least a little while. I'm the kind of guy I get bored after a few years, so may end up moving somewhere else. I'm not sure. But it was good growing up here. A lot of good memories around. We had enough land to get out and run around in the woods or jump down to Panama City. We'd go off go out on the Gulf, go fishing, and just general whatever we could get into, we would find it.
Were you drawn to anything specific in school?
In school, I was probably drawn away from more things than I was drawn into, but I and I was always drawing. Literally, I mean, I was probably not paying attention like I should have. I was drawing stuff on paper, whether it was blueprints. I love drawing blueprints. I would draw blueprints of ships all day, airplanes, because I was just always around it growing up. So, my dad had me around airplanes at a young age. We loved flying, and I love the idea of racing planes and captaining ships and racing boats and everything in between. So as I grew up, I really wanted to be a pilot. And by the time I was in high school, it was I started to think about money more. And as the more I looked into it, I said, I don't know if being a pilot is for me right now. That was once again, 2010's the year I graduated. So it was kind of like the industry wasn't doing so hot. And I didn't go, I had no direction really. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, if I wanted to take off to college or anything like that. And I just started looking for jobs, and I didn't, I kind of just put it on hold. And I still say that, I'd like to fly again, but I don't. Obviously, I wound up in the maritime industry, and it's just, man, it's taken a hold of me over the last few years. I ended up my first job after high school, and I worked for my dad for a little while at the trucking company, working in safety and that kind of stuff, just basically clerical, doing paperwork and answering phones. And then my first real job, or what I consider a job that I got myself, with no one else's help, I worked for Mercury Marine in Panama City, Florida, and that really kicked off my maritime career.
Tell me about that job.
Well, I was a test pilot, or crash test dummy, if you will. We we worked in the research and development side of things for Mercury Marine, and endurance pilots, or endurance drivers, what they would call us. I've probably been on over 120 different boats for Mercury, testing prototype engines, prototype systems, just different types of hulls, anything you can imagine, we tested. I mean, I think we even, at one point, I'm pretty sure we even tested some kind of keychain to make sure it wasn't going to break. And we were the guys that gave it to at the time, to make sure what they're building is the product that they want to release. And sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. And I was definitely the youngest there. I think I was 17 or 18 when I started there. And I actually recently just went back to my facility manager, who's since retired. His name was Bill Nestler. And I actually sent him an email or message on Facebook, I think it was. And I said, Bill, I said, I got to go back and I got to ask you, because I know I was the youngest guy there. And this really kind of set me in a direction that I never thought I was going to go in my life. And it's been a great one. Why did you hire me? And he said, well, some guys you just know. And I said, okay, so that's good enough for me. So we've been kind of talking back and forth ever since. And it was one crazy job for an 18-year-old to give a guy, a $1.3 million prototype boat and say, here you go, 10 hours, go break it or something. Yeah. So we'd run out in the Gulf, full throttle, whatever we could do. We'd jump waves, just we'd adhere to different testing principles and standards. But at the end of the day, we were just running boats to see what happens. And I mean, we'd put hundreds and hundreds of hours on these new engines, and just put them through the tests. There was actually even a test we had at one point to run a boat aground, basically, find a shallow spot and make sure the engine kicks up like it's supposed to. A lot of different crazy stuff. And I had so much fun. To this day, that's still probably the best job I ever had. The pay wasn't there, but the way it influenced me and the people that I had around me, honestly, I did grow up with, strong maritime support kind of deal with my dad and my uncle. Just everybody in my family loved being around the water. But one guy that really took to me and became one of my mentors and best friends at Mercury Marine was Captain Brian Rogers. And, he just I stuck around him. I was stuck to him for a long time. And he, kind of explained all the superstitions and, he ran shrimp boats in his off time and had been on several different ships and things like that. He's one of those salty old sailors you meet, and he just kind of raised me up in that industry to begin with. And after that, it was just keep going from there.
Any specific instances come to mind of a crazy test run?
Yeah, there's one I love to bring up on the boat all the time, and the guys know it. My crew definitely knows it because I talk about it when we talk about man overboards. And I was actually thrown out of a boat against my will, for sure. It was middle of winter too in Panama City, which is no picnic because our moisture content in the air and just the cold weather it's just gets right to the bones. And I was running a boat, and it was known for kind of chine walking on the water, and as get up to a plane. But we were used to this. We've been running it for weeks. Um, and one day it was kind of gray, overcast, got a good 2 to 3 foot chop. So we're running out to what we call or the West Bay area, which is typically where we could find some calmer running in between some of these little sounds and everything, where it's a lot flatter water. But on the way there, it's real tough and rocky. And I'm running with a guy that's running quite a bit faster than me. I'm probably going about 55, 60, something like that. It's a center console. I'm not sure of the engine. I know it was one of the prototypes we were testing. The hull design was some kind of off-brand deal that I'm not even sure exactly what it is. But the guy I was running with, we always ran in pairs. He's going out in front of me. He's probably 2 or 3 miles ahead of me. We usually try to stick together, but you got two boats that are mismatched in speed. He's going to take off and run a couple miles, come back, kind of do loops around me. So he comes past me, keeps going, and I'm just cruising along. I start to get almost like this premonition, and at least this is how I remember it. And we wore, Snell rated helmets. I'm wearing a float coat, the PFD float coats, because it was wintertime. It's the only thing to keep you warm and keep you afloat. I wasn't wearing the bottoms to it. I had jeans on and some black combat boots. And I remember just kind of looking down, and something wasn't feeling right. It was starting that little bit of odd chine walk again. And I reached up, grabbed the throttle, started to trim the engine down and kind of pull back at the same time. I kind of looked down at my speed, see it somewhere in the area, 55, 50 mile an hour, and then just darkness. I don't remember anything that happened as far as how I got to the next point in time that I was, but I remember everything just went blank. And I woke up underwater, and I remember opening my eyes. It was very dark, or just kind of a green tint, and see a little shimmer above me, and I remember opening my eyes and going saying, damn, I'm late for work. Then I floated a little closer and realized I wasn't late for work. I was underwater, and it might be a little cold. Now I popped up above the water. My helmet was gone, was the first thing I realized, which was a weird thing to me because I remember strapping it on and everything. So I pop up, look around, I see the boat over here. I see my helmet over here. I grab my helmet and kind of use it to help me float. And I'm swimming back to this boat. And I'm like, man, I said, I hope I don't get fired for this. And so I don't know even what happened, and I get all the way back to the boat, and I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I didn't get hurt. Like, I don't know how, but I didn't get hurt somehow. And I'm trying to get back in the boat, and it's just a pain. I'm starting to feel something kind of weird, and looking down, I can't get back in the boat. And I look behind me, and there's a blood trail in the water about 50 feet. And I'm like, that can't be good. So I ended up climbing back in the boat eventually. My wingman kind of makes it back to me, and he's on the phone first with our little headquarters, and he's on the phone with the doctor or the hospital. I'm kind of doing a little triage on myself in my dazed state that's starting to kind of get a little stiffer since it's as cold as it is outside, and I'm still not hurting. I don't know if anything's wrong with me or not. And I see blood, and I don't know where the blood's coming from. And he's on the phone, and he's saying, yeah, it looks like he might have busted his lip up. I said, oh, Dad, I got my lip. I'm just looking at the blood, and he's like, yeah, you got it pretty good, buddy. Well, it ends up my teeth actually went through my face when the helmet came back and hit the water. So my lower lip was actually just kind of hanging on my teeth, that was fun. But Ended up, he'd say, "Oh, man, just get in my boat, just get in my boat, lay down, like, let's get you back to the dock and everything, get you some dry clothes on at least." And I said, "No, no, no, I don't want to leave the boat here. I don't know what's going on with it, but I think I can drive it back." So I ended up just having him kind of plow back. I'm following him behind him in his wake, make it all the way back to the dock. Once again, in this state I'm in, I'm yelling at the senior tech on the dock. I'm like, "Hey, man, we're used to kind of turning them around and backing them in." I said, "I don't think I can back this thing in." He's like, "Whatever, dude, just get here." And pull in, go to the hospital. Had your shattered ribs, the whole lip thing going on there, a little bit of damage, but wasn't terribly hurt. And I ended up spending about a month out of work, just sore, laid up in bed, which they, to their credit, like I said, they called, checked on me almost every day. My facility manager came over there for statements and also just want to hang out and talk to me, like, what happened? Ended up, I don't know what they actually came out with, but I think it was a steering cable breakage and or a slip or something that ended up kicking at the same time. It was just one of those perfect storms of it chime walking, the engine kicking one time, and everything just going sideways and going from 55 mph to zero real fast. And I probably went across the water about the same, just going end over end over end, breaking my helmet and everything else. So that's pretty wild. But I got to experience that, and I really appreciate that I wasn't actually hurt, and I can take that experience into these man overboard talks with the guys every month.
Well, where did your career take you from there?
From there, that's kind of a wild thing for. I think I left there when I was probably 21 years old or 22 years old. I went to Texas, Houston, Texas, to work at the Port of Houston with a company called Trican Enterprises, and they were contracted out under West Gulf Maritime Association. And the stipulation was, they said, "Okay, well, we've talked to a few of the engineers at Mercury, and one of the last projects I worked on at Mercury was our joystick controlled systems and that kind of stuff, position holding and things of that nature." And they said, "Well, look, we're looking for guys that can come out here and teach crane operators how to use digital systems going from hydraulics." So I ended up going out there, and I remember, sitting down with the guys. I'm like, "Look, I've never been in a crane in my life." I said, "I can figure it out pretty quick. I'm pretty good at that. I operate all kinds of equipment and everything else, but I'm not sure about these big shore container cranes and that type of stuff." And they said, "We know, we'll train you up on it and everything." And I was very just how fortunate I was to get that opportunity and just to take that and run with it. And that's what I wanted to do. I really hit the ground running there with those guys, and they were very good to me. They trained me up in every piece of equipment at the port. I mean, I can run top loaders, heavy lifts, shoreside, shore container gantry cranes, rubber tire gantry cranes. I got experience in all those things and kind of became an efficiency instructor. I wasn't necessarily the guy that would teach them how to do every little thing on it, but I taught them how to get faster with it, and the different control systems and things like that. And ended up becoming their outports operations manager for all the ports outside of Port of Houston. So I would do stuff at Port of Houston as needed, but most of the time I stayed on the road. Went to Lake Charles, Louisiana, to their port, doing a lot of things. Did some negotiations, working with the guys out there, Port of Beaumont, Corpus Christi, pretty much all over Texas and Louisiana, minus Port of New Orleans. I never worked there. I don't think West Gulf was in there. I did that for a few years. I had to live in Houston. And while I did enjoy that, I'm one of those guys that walk around. I'm like, "Man, I miss Texas. I miss Houston. I miss Houston," but I still don't want to live there. It's just, and it's when I was home, which wasn't very often. It's just traffic and just people and just so much going on. I kind of miss the quiet of back home. So started looking for something else, which a lot of people thought I was out of my mind. But that was actually my first exposure to the towing industry. I mean, I remember looking at the boats when I worked at Mercury. I'd be going by them, I'm like, I see these unit tows running on the intercoastal. I'm like, "God, I could never do that. I could never do that." Like 10 mph maximum. Like I'd just fall asleep. Since then, I've learned 10 mph can be very fast. But so I run around in Houston. One of my jobs, I was working as a third party safety rep for ISO 9000 insurance, for the Houston and Texas Mooring Associations, the guy that's tied the ships off at the docks there at Port of Houston and everything. I was kind of like a liaison between my company and them, and their safety guy for third party instances. And I'd go see these boats all the time, be tied off next to these ships that I'd be doing surveys on. And I'm like, man, I don't know anything about that industry. I mean, I know absolutely nothing, just zero, nothing. And then my brother actually ended up going to work for him. He ended up working at ACBL. He's a tankerman on the Jack Odom. Most previously, he actually passed away this December or November. I'm sorry, but and I'm one of those guys. I got to take stuff apart. I don't care if I put it back together or not, but I got to take things apart and I got to look at it. I got to see how everything works inside it. And that was just kind of me with the towing industry from that point on. Is, man, I got to know more about these guys. I know everything about ships, or a lot about ships. I know a lot about the inner workings of the longshore associations, the ports, just almost everything in between the maritime industry, but I had absolutely no clue about the inland industry. And it was like, it was hard to get into. And which is one of the things that I'd like to see kind of change. I like it to be more accessible to people. But I just took it from there and started talking to my brother about it at the time. And he said, man, he said, honestly, he said, I haven't felt more at home at any other company than I do right here. I said, well, I could probably do that. And it was a big step down salary wise, leaving my job in Houston. And it was one of those things I had to keep telling myself it was going to be worth it. So it ended up taking me like 4 or 5 months to get hired. So all my savings are kind of burned up by the time I went up to what they call their RS1, the River Seamanship 1. And it was worth it in the end. It was a tough road for sure.
Do you want to talk about what happened to your brother?
Well, he worked there at ACBL and the Jack Odom for quite a while. Ended up getting injured and leaving for some time. Did quite a few other things. He ended up working auto fishing charters here out of Mexico Beach, I believe, and he had a car accident in November and passed away. But I'm happy he was, at that time he was doing something he loved, and like I said, we've all been in and around the maritime industry. He was a veteran. He had come home, done Operation Iraqi Freedom, everything else, and it's kind of hard for him reintegrating, and he really just couldn't find the right job. And when he moved to ACBL, that was when he was at his happiest, I think. And then anything else from that, he realizes to stay in the maritime industry and you kind of have this brotherhood. And that was what he always told me. He said, hey, look, I haven't felt like I've had a family since I was in the Army, and now I feel like I have a family, and I really like that for him. So, but he did a lot of charter work out of Mexico Beach was the last thing he was doing. That was good. There's a lot of memories made there for him, and I think he really, really did enjoy that. So I'm happy that he at least found that kind of peace in his life, once he moved on.
Well, thank you for sharing it. I'm sorry to hear that, man.
Yeah.
Before we get into your inland industry experience, I saw also on LinkedIn you're a certified diver. Was that before or after your
That
career?
was long before. I believe, and my dad had me in the water when I was like 6 or 7 years old, teaching me how to breathe underwater. And I was in the pool, I just remember that's probably one of my earliest memories is you got the octopus on your stages, everything, got the regulator, and sitting there just looking at me and just, in, out, teaching me how to breathe. My dad was a huge diver. So was my uncle. So that's what they grew up doing. And that's what me and my brother and I grew up doing. Now we pushed our limits a little bit. My brother and I, we would go out and we'd find these springs. North Florida, they're just peppered all over the map, and we'd even go to different farmers' houses. They've been using these springs for irrigation for 20 or 30 years. And we'd ask them like, hey, can we go, check out your spring? And we'd go push ourselves into the caves a little bit, which I do not advise. That's not a smart thing to do, but we were, I was a teenager anyway. He was probably just 20s then, but we had a lot of fun. We dive everywhere we could. I mean, we had a little inflatable Avon raft that our dad had bought, and we would throw our gear in this raft pull it off the Jeep, have it on our shoulders. We pack it through the woods, drop it in the water, and we just go exploring, just diving, just swimming everywhere all day. But yeah, I've been diving all my life. I recently just purchased all new gear and have not touched the water yet, but I'm looking to get started again. It's just I'm at that point in my life where I've got so many hobbies. I gotta push it down a little bit and see if I can get back to this one or not.
Any especially memorable experiences from a dive?
All of them have been pretty fun. I think I remember probably the most memorable, diving with my dad the first time I ever went in deep water, probably 85 feet or so in the Gulf of Mexico, which is relative depending on what kind of diver you are. But it was one of those things. I think the visibility wasn't great. It's really green water. It was cold. And we went down, hit the bottom, and I'm just looking at my dad, I'm like, I can't see anything. I'm seeing like 4 or 5 feet in front of my face. And he's just like looking at his compass for a second, kind of looks around and just takes off. He takes off and I'm following him. We get there. There's this big LCAC, the military hovercrafts, they had sunk there as an artificial reef, and just seeing that pop up. And there's this 6-foot long barracuda just swimming around there. And I remember him just swimming up to it, and he had a spear gun. He just kind of poked it in the face and it swam off, and we spent a good little while down there just exploring the LCAC and swimming around. And that's probably one of my best memories diving, actually. And since then it's been jumping in springs and prodding around the outside of these caves and taking a look at what I can find on the bottom, whether it's sunglasses or a boat or something, and then I spent a lot of time even in the marina working on a boat underwater, just scraping the hull from barnacles, scraping the props off and stuff like that. But I guess one of those things I got to get back to. It's been a long time. I've been trying to work myself up to it again. I want to try and start doing some night dives, winter dives, stuff like that.
Well, cool. All right. Well, fast forward, we're going to become a deckhand, I think. Stepping out of Houston. Walk me through that.
So I ended up moving back to Panama City and started the process of trying to get hired on with ACBL, because I decided I actually gave the company in Houston a 6-month notice, and I don't think they believed me too much after that. And that was kind of hard leaving Houston because it was a great job, great people, great benefits, but I had to go. I didn't want to be there anymore. Ended up back in Panama City. I did my interview, or not my interview, I'm sorry, my application with ACBL. I said, okay, I want to go try this out. I had something to prove to myself. And what it was, it wasn't so much Houston as it was I did have something to prove to myself, because I worked with these guys and I taught all these classes in Houston, and I didn't like myself for it. I never wanted to be that guy that had never done anything he was teaching. I was an effective teacher, but I didn't have the hands-on knowledge with a lot of stuff, and I'd never done it as a job. And I felt like I needed to do that. And I felt, with the inland industry, me not knowing about it, that's what I want to do next. So I make it back, and it takes several months for them to finally get back to me and say, okay, you got an interview. It's in Houston, Texas. I said, okay, of course. So I go to Houston. We go to this hotel. I think there's like 225 applicants there. And I was extremely impressed, coming from a safety and training background, how they did it. And I can't remember the name of the guy I was sitting next to, but both of us were kind of set back and confused by the way they were doing this, because they said, all right, everybody in this one room, after they make it past the initial documentation and everything, and they said, we're going to do a reading test. So everybody in here is going to do a reading test. And it was like it was an impossible test. It was like a 48 question test, and they wanted you to do it in like 35, 45 seconds or something like that. So everybody's panicking, they're like, oh, no. Like, I can't do that. Like, oh, how am I supposed to do this? And so everybody's just, color, trying to do everything fast. I'm like, whatever, So I just start answering questions the way I know how. And they're not hard, they're typical easy math questions or safety questions and things like that. And we get through it and say, which I hope I'm giving away their secrets here, but I don't know if they do this anymore or not. Say, okay, time's up. I'm like, well, me and the guy next to each other, guess we're out, like I'm not that fast. And come back, and they said, they actually talked to me and they said, you've got one of the highest scores. I said, I only made it to like 16. I said, yeah, but all yours were right. I said, everybody else just started guessing. And that's the whole thing. They want you to think correctly. It doesn't matter how long you take, just think about it correctly. So make it into that. And I think actually after that, I want to say 25 people got an offer after that. We went to RS1 with those 25. And I think out of those 25, 17 actually made it and became deckhands. And I was one of the 17. My first boat was the Tom Fraser. I was on the motor vessel Tom Fraser. And you know, it's just a little bit of a culture shock going from all of that back to the boat. You know, I know it's a little bit more relaxing than training at the time. Very happy to be on a boat. You know, it's an awe-inspiring thing, especially when you've never seen any of this stuff before and you didn't know anything about the industry to begin with. And I had a very good crew getting on. Looking back, you know, I'm so fortunate I got the crew I did. The lead man that I actually had training me, he was a little bit I'd say a little obsessive compulsive, but a very good man. And he had been to the Chicago Art Institute, and that was kind of the first taste of just how diverse the industry is and how these guys actually are compared to what people think of, you know, because, you know, I kind of heard the ship guys talk about stuff and like, you know, there's a bunch of criminals and prisoners out there and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, well, sure, there might have been, but now it's just so many different people. I mean, look at me, I'm a fish out of water for sure. And I'm working with this guy and he is on point. I mean, his ability to follow policy and just the things that he does and how he does them just impress me. I mean, you know, he's an artist. He talked to me about the videography stuff he did at school and that kind of stuff. I said, well, why didn't you want to pursue that? And he said, I just like manual labor. He said, I really like this job. I love what I do. And those people exist. And I'm just eternally thankful for them because, you know, decking, I didn't like, I mean, I had fun, but I did not want to do that for a long time. There are guys out there that like it and there's nothing wrong with that. And man, those guys are awesome. I mean, my hat's off to them because they work so hard and that's what they love. They love their job. They love just how they do things out there and they really take pride in it. And I'm, like I said, I'm very fortunate to have a crew like that and to work with a crew like that. You know, between him and the mate that was on board at the time, the mate, you know, he'd get up and come out, you know, he'd say, all right, let's go out on tow, you know, and let's go throw some lines or let's go tie some stuff off, go out here and show me this, show me that. And that just really impressed me coming from a place where, you know, with the Longshoring Association, it's kind of like, hey, we got to force these guys to train. Well, here it's guys really, he knows he's going to need me at some point in time. So he comes out there and is proactive about training his guys. And I really like that. After the Tom Fraser, you know, I really wanted to stay on that boat. I was on there with Captain Garen Sneed and the pilot at the time, I think was Claude Clemens, and just a great crew. And but that's just not how it works with them. Once you do your training, you know, on a certain boat, you do a couple trips there maybe, and if they have a slot open you might stay, but a lot of times they'll push you on to the next boat. And I ended up going to the Larry Weiss train with Steve Hackamack, who is I would count as one of my many mentors. He's outstanding captain, definitely has a name for himself. And I ended up meeting Derek Craig on that boat. It was the mate, and man, when I got on that boat I did not like that guy. Oh, I didn't like him, but we ended up becoming best friends and we're both pilots now. But I worked with him for I think 5 years, and probably got a little comfortable on deck. You know, we had so much fun out there. We worked on the strain and just both of us had this idea. We had different ideas of getting there, but we both had this idea. We wanted to have the nicest boat out there, and we really worked hard on that. And that was a Jeff boat class boat, Larry Strain. It was one heck of an adventure. I mean, I didn't want to stay on deck. I knew that. He had been on deck for many years and he didn't want to be on deck anymore. Both of us wanted to kind of move towards the pilot house. We had a couple of different captains after that and ended up, I believe my original sponsor would have been Billy Joe King. And from there, it was just trying to deck and steer at the same time. I believe he and I both kind of came up when, you know, there were no steersman programs at the time. So we decked and we steered and decked and steered and did some more, you know, lacked a lot of sleep, but we made it. And it was a good time though. You know, it was great. And I ended up lucking out with the Captain Dan Thomas, which was formerly the WT Toutant, which was named after Commander William Toutant that actually designed the Jeff boat class, and got on there with Captain Danny Thomas himself. And he and I kind of hit it off in the first week of me riding over there. And I said, you know, Captain, I think I could maybe come over here and ride with you, and ended up riding with him for a while and really just got along great in the wheelhouse. You know, ended up he's from Weehawken, Florida, which I didn't know anyone else in the industry could possibly know where that is, let alone be from there. And he lives in Tennessee now, but he's been my partner ever since. I mean, we've been really close, and you know, he's like family to me. So I'm just extremely fortunate and extremely happy to be where I'm at now.
When did they rename the boat after the man running it?
I want to say it was about a year ago. It would have been his I could be completely wrong on that time, but I want to say it was his 45th year with the company. They decided to rename it the Captain Dan Thomas, and it took him completely by surprise, because Danny had always told me, he said, you know, he said, one of his buddies was always on about getting the boat named after him, getting the boat named after him. I said, I don't really, you know, if I can do it, fine. If not, whatever. You know, I don't really care. I don't need a boat named after me. He's just one of those guys. And they called him after this kind of a rocky trip we had, and he said they called him out and said, we want to have dinner with you, you know, and all that kind of stuff. He said, oh God, they're going to try and resign me or something, you know. And I said, well, how would you feel about riding on a boat that you're named after? And he said, really? So that was about a year ago. We're still getting our name worked out. I think we haven't even put the front name on it. We had trouble getting that last decal, but it is officially now the Captain Dan Thomas, and named after a great individual. I mean, he's a great captain. He's been a great person. Like I said, he's like family to me. Very happy to be able to work with him. I think he's on his 47th year now, actually. So it was a little while ago, but he wants to make it to 50, I think, at least. So we're hoping for that, and just glad to be there.
Absolutely. Before we get into some stories behind the sticks, walk back to where it began. Tell me about RS1 and deckhand training.
So, you know, it's gone through some changes since, so I'm not sure what it's like now, but at the time, had us come up to Jeffersonville, Indiana, and I went into a hotel, actually roomed with a guy that was a former Marine. And from there, we went into kind of classroom stuff for the first week. We went through that. It was very militant, and I appreciated that. It was very disciplined. I mean, it was, you know, you were expected to act a certain way, and if you didn't act that certain way, you went home. And like I said, from the way that I trained and the people that I trained in Houston, I really appreciated that. I mean, it was very professional. It was very safety focused, which naturally everything today is, and as it should be. First week, we go into this classroom, you know, they explain the rules to us. Actually, I remember walking in the hotel that night, you know, and I think he's since retired, but Frank, one of the port mates, he walks in, and we're all looking like, oh man, they got a nice bar in here and everything else. He said, he walks in just completely straight face, goes, if I catch any one of you with alcohol, you're fired immediately. So that was off the table for then. But we went in, and a lot of memorization, a lot of just repetition. We do our briefings, you know, how we brief on a ship or a boat or anything else. You know, we tell everybody where the fire extinguishers, first aid, AED, all that kind of stuff is. You got to memorize the building, the floors, and where the exits are, where the passageways are, all your 3 points of contact, that kind of stuff. And it was some kind of experience. Now, the second week, we went on to Cairo, Illinois, and the infamous Cairo fleet. And my hat is off of those guys. I've worked with them many times. You know, they get a everybody talks, oh, Cairo this, Cairo that, and those guys work hard. And the ones that show up and do the job, that is a hell of a job to manage that fleet and run that fleet. That's a lot of barges moving in and out every day, a lot of tows moving in and out. But we we go there, we're completely lost, or most of us. I think there's a couple of guys that has some experience working on the pad and trying to line out how we need to wire by ACBL standards, and what to do and what not to do. Packing rigging, that's a favorite, make sure everybody can physically do the job. You got to pack some rigging, and you'll be packing that rigging for a long way, and it's a painful thing. I think my shoulders bled that first week, second week. In fact, that former Marine buddy of mine, he was about, I felt like he was twice my size, but he oil industry guy too, is where he just came from. And he would reach over and just kind of grab it, pull it back up on my shoulder with one hand and be like, keep going. I'm like, yep. So from there, we go out, we work in the fleets with the port mates, supervision, everything, and kind of get a good orientation of how things work. And you could say that, but it's over time you learn this kind of stuff. That first few weeks, it's just like, I don't know what's going on. There's wires going everywhere and everything. You might learn to lay a proper fore and aft, or maybe a breast here and there, but you don't really learn until you're on the boats. And I think that's what they've kind of decided recently, is they learn more on the boats. And I think they've shortened that training time, which I don't necessarily know if that was a good thing or not, but it takes a while to make a good deckhand. I'd say at least maybe a year and a half, unless you got someone that's just someone that really hits the ground running. But even me, I consider myself able to learn pretty well, and I didn't pick it up as fast as I thought I would. It's a heck of a job.
For the sake of the folks that don't know anything about our industry that might be watching this, explain to me, I guess, or to them, details on rigging, how long you're dragging it, how much each type of it weighs, and I guess all that kind of stuff.
Oh man, it's spent at least a couple of years since I've been on deck, but you never forget. I think it's I'd say a portable wire probably weighs about maybe 60 pounds, 70 pounds. And that's the one I hate carrying. I'll carry a ratchet all day long. Don't make me carry a wire. But I think that's how a lot of people still feel. As a wire, it's maybe a 3/4 inch cable, steel cable, and it's just digging into your arm that whole time. You're trying to carry it, and it's just loaded up with grease. And I still hate watching guys do that. If you don't have one that's rolled up tight enough, those are the worst, because it's just hitting your leg the whole time, just leaving blisters on your legs. And man, it was a rough thing. In training, they'd make you do laps with them, and you just walk, I don't know how far, you do 20-30 laps or something in a little short course, but it didn't matter how long it was. It was just painful. And I think they really try to prepare you for what you might have to deal with out there. Thankfully, I never actually ran into, in my career on deck, very short career, I would say, but where I really had to pack rigging as much as that. But I have had to pack rigging, and I think it was a good thing to teach me not to be scared to pack rigging. I think you make it through even that little short training period. It's like, well, I've packed rigging that long, I can, pack it from the stern to the head of tow if I've got to, or whatever else. And you've got portable ratchets. Portable ratchets, I don't know, maybe 45 to 60 pounds, somewhere in there. I could be completely wrong. Not like the old steamboat ratchets in the hundreds of pounds and everything else, but they're not fun, but at least you got something to kind of brace on when you carry them. And straps, never like carrying straps, especially the way you got to, because they don't want you to drag anything. We don't drag anything. You got to pick it all up. So you got to carry the link and the wire in your hand, and it's just not a comfortable feeling, but you got to have at least two to balance yourself out to do it. So as a pilot, I try to make sure that my guys don't have to pack rigging as much as possible. Now someone's laughing right now by listening to that, but I try. Believe me, I try. I hate watching those guys do more work than they have to. That's a lot of work, and I don't think those guys get enough thankful. Just no one thanks them enough for what they do, and I definitely don't, but I try to every time I get the chance. And just want to make sure they know that it's a tough job for sure. And that's one of the things when I first met Derek Craig, who's one of my best friends out there, like I said, he's a pilot on the Tony Espinosa now. Always talk about that, and he'd sit around and be like, man, it's not a hard job, it's not a hard job. I'm like, man, but from the outside looking in, it's a hard job. And what those guys do on deck is just impressive still to me now. And like I said, these guys that are out there for decades, I don't think I can do it. I mean, it's just so impressive that they can do that for that long.
You told me beforehand you're running 15 barge tows now.
So typically what we'll do lately, now we're in the utility fleet. The utility fleet is kind of we do what they need it, when they need it, where they need it kind of thing. Now I can run most anything with the exception of the lower Mississippi southbound. I have done it. I'm just not familiar enough to try and do it alone. So I'd still ask for someone to ride with me. I don't really care for the lower so much. I know this is completely opposite of what some people say, but I find the lower boring. I love it. Southbound, exciting. Absolutely. Northbound, it's just a grind with these 6,000s. It's just a long way, and it's 2 to 3 mile an hour trying to find the slack water, running over what bars you can. I can't stand it. I need something different. So I like the Illinois River, and that feels weird to say because that is the weirdest thing now. But I do like the Illinois. We'll run 15 up the Illinois, but typically out of Cairo, we'll pick up a tow of maybe 20, 25, sometimes 30, depending, empties, loads, that kind of thing. We mix tows. We're just whenever they need it. We'll go up the upper St. Louis. We'll do a lot of different tow work at all the different fleets. Come out of there with 15 or 16 and going up into the chain of rocks, go up through there and head on up the Illinois. Illinois, a lot of people will tell you, is a 12 barge river, and I can see that for sure. I've just gotten to the point where I'm not going to say I feel comfortable, because as soon as you say you feel comfortable with something out there, the river's going to slap you right in the face, and it almost has many times. And I think it's just to keep you honest, but I feel comfortable with 15 at the moment, northbound at least up there, and I can take 15 south all right as well. I've learned I don't have to steer everything. I learned I can back up and take my time with stuff. I love the upper. Now the upper Mississippi proper, all the way up to St. Paul and everything. I can't run as a pilot. I haven't been posted there. I wouldn't mind it. I decked up there. That was one of those horror story rivers. We're like, oh, you don't want to go up the upper. You don't want to go up the upper. There's so many locks and everything else. Man, I had a great crew. I rode on the Brad Bennick up there, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, it's just a beautiful river. And with a good crew, those locks, they don't take any time. I mean, it's like a minor inconvenience every watch or every other watch. I love the upper from St. Louis to Cairo, southbound and northbound. So kind of like the Illinois to me. I mean, that's how I run the Illinois now. And it's just highly technical. As long as you're in the right place at the right time, you're going to make a steer. You're going to make, whatever you want to flank. It's just all about timing and learning the river. And once again, like I said, I'm nowhere near an expert. I'm nowhere near one of these guys, but as soon as you feel like you've learned it all, I think the river's ready to slap you in the face and let you know you haven't. Even this last trip, I came down through Chain of Rocks Canal, and when things don't happen and you expect them to happen, that's when I mess up the most. I come out of Chain of Rocks Canal and come down on Merchants and McKinley Bridge. The draft wasn't where it normally was for me, and it had been quite a few trips since I've had one of those moments where you get the cold sweats and you start praying to whatever deity's close enough, and it was very close to that. And I come out smelling like a rose and just right on the sailing line, beautiful and everything else. But when the radios get quiet and everything, somebody's messing up. That's always embarrassing, but it's keeps you humble. And I love that. I love the different things like that, because now that I know how to get myself out of trouble, because it's still a learning thing. So I've only been a pilot for a few years now, and it's been a process.
How long have you had your license?
I want to say, man, it's been I've had pilot's license, mate pilot, since I think April of 2021, maybe. Not entirely sure. I know I've been boy, you'd have to ask me that one. The dates and everything, it just blends into one lately.
In any case, it's a first issue, huh?
Yeah, it's the first
Yeah.
issue. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going.
Well, you mentioned earlier before we started recording that you've run the length of the Ohio all the way to Pittsburgh. Tell me what you can about that trip.
Well, yeah, I don't remember much about the upper end. I don't get to run up there so often. We run, we typically get up to Cincinnati at least, and then we'll move on up to, we have the Georgetown fleets, and that's a typical run. That's the run everybody wishes for. They want Georgetown. That's a long run. I love the Ohio most of the time. Usually when they send us up there, it's because there's high water, and if there's high water, that's when they want the horsepower up there. So they'll send us on up, and it all kind of runs into one sometimes. Sometimes Ohio can be kind of a grind in itself, kind of like the lower, but I do enjoy it because you've got longer amount of time between tow work than you do like on the Illinois or the upper. And it gives the guys a chance to actually get the boat cleaned up and get things comfortable. And it's beautiful up there. I mean, you get to see everything. Of course, we move on up to Louisville and make those Louisville bridges and that kind of stuff. You got the L&I Railroad Bridge. That was one of those bridges. I believe it's a Truman Hobbs Act bridge that is considered kind of a little crazy. You go into that canal and you've got the long seawall and it's very narrow. And that was one of those things I was kind of nervous about beginning in my career. And the first couple of times I made it, I'm like, isn't as scary as I thought it was, And so I always enjoy kind of revisiting those areas, going up to Louisville city front, moving on up the river, and just having those long stretches where I can actually just steer a boat, not have to listen to the radio, not have to talk to traffic so much. And it's just enjoyable. It's a good break to me from a lot of different things. Southbound and high water can be a different story in some areas, but it's generally pretty tame on up. It gets a little narrow, but I really enjoyed it up there. And of course, we always use we use Wootton's and Ramp Stop. Ramp Stop more often than not, and I believe Ramp Stop just delivered to us on the Illinois as well. They've been a great company, and most recently they actually recognized my cook and made her the cook of the month. I think it was they were doing for a while or something like that, and that was great for her. Oh my gosh, she almost cried. It was great. It was I did a recipe of hers and everything, put it in their calendar. But yeah, it's a good break for us from some of that upper and Illinois stuff that it just we spend too much time in one place, it just kind of becomes a grind and you just get tired of it really fast. I mean, the burnout on some of those rivers is just incredible for some things, just the back and forth, and for the crew too, constantly do tow work and that kind of stuff.
I've got one last question written down, so we'll see where what develops here. But you mentioned earlier that you wished back then that the inland marine industry was possibly more accessible than it appeared to be at the time, or appears to have you seen improvements over the years?
I have seen improvements. That's one of the things that I'd like to kind of get into doing. It's a cultural thing. I think the industry itself is a little bit behind compared to the rest of the maritime industry, and a lot of these guys, like I said, they don't give themselves enough credit for what they do. I think recruiting needs to change. That's a conversation I've had with a lot of people, because myself and this other pilot I was talking about earlier, we get on the phone almost every night. We're talking about like, man, what's going on? Like, where is everybody? And it's a cultural thing. It's a corporate culture and just community culture. And I'm so glad for American Waterways and all the new things that are popping up, like Kenny Brown's Maritime Throwdown. I believe it was it Gerald East talking about his app that he's coming out with. love that. And I listened to that the other day, man. I love that idea. That's great. Just kind of coming into the modern times with this stuff, and just something to attract the public to it. Now, I understand the other point of view where we don't want that much attention, but I think a lot of these guys don't understand how sensitive and how just easy the Jones Act is to kind of disrupt, and that's what really allows us to exist. And if we let that go, or we let people, if they don't know about us, what are they going to do for us? It's a thankless job already, and that's fine. Nobody out here is asking for thanks, but we need some kind of recognition to keep us around. And I think if we really focus on building a community and a culture outside of the industry, I'm not just talking about one inside the industry. There's a lot of stuff that does that, but actually, educating the public on what we do, talking about what we do, and just really emphasizing the importance of what we do, we would get more people. We're presenting a challenge to people. I know a lot of guys want to talk about, well, we got to up pay, we got to up pay. And yeah, pay is a thing. It's not something I'm willing to get into on pay. I have a lot of my own opinions as well, but pay is something. But the other thing is building a culture. There's a lot of stuff that's built on just culture. If you think of like the micro brewing industry, it looked like boomed overnight, and it became like a thing to do. Well, you could do that with towing industry. I mean, it's the same concept. You make something cool, or you make something, open to the community, something that everybody can get into. We would not have these shortages, I would think. And it's got to be done carefully. It's something we all got to work together on, and kind of develop these programs to talk to people and just get something going, and talk to the kids at school. I mean, why do we not have recruiting teams in school talking to the kids about what's going on the river and why it's so important? Because it's so unique. There are countries all over the world that have some form of towing industry, but not on the scale that we have it. I mean, the amount of rivers that we have, the amount of cargo that we move inland is just staggering. It's incredible what we can do with our inland industry. And, like I said, these guys, they don't give themselves enough credit. And I think that's becoming a little bit of a cultural problem. And I really hope that people start to recognize what's actually going on inside the United States, as opposed to just everything else around us, which I know we've started to get some publicity in Louisville, not for good reasons, but mostly due to that, just media overblowing things with the incident in Louisville and stuff like that. But yeah, I really hope we start to kind of go in a direction where we can open up a little bit more to the public, let them know we exist, let them know we're an opportunity. We can do things for you in your life. It's not a last resort kind of job. It's just an opportunistic, very, very open world. I mean, you can go anywhere. I never thought I was going to be a towboat pilot when I was 16 years old or something, thinking about what I wanted to do for a living. But if someone came along and I was in high school and said, hey, here's this job, it pays great, you're going to have a lot of freedom, you're going to have a lot of time off, you're going to meet great people, and you're honestly just going to love it, after a little bit of time, I probably would have considered that before I went to a lot of other things. I'm very thankful for the experiences I've had, but I would like to see people open those options up to youth and just the general public, and not, we seem to target just career fields and target demographics of people that are already working. And that's okay. I understand wanting to get skilled labor, but for instance, I've on my boat recently promoted two guys off there, Jared and Alex, and these guys were, man, they were outstanding. I mean, a lot of people want to blame new generations and talk about, well, the kids these days kind of thing. And I really don't subscribe to that. I get it. But like Jared, I think he was 18 when he got on the boat. And this kid, he hit the ground running. He knew what he wanted to do. He knew where he wanted to go. And I said, just go for it, dude. And don't let anybody ever tell you no. And I think he just became one of our youngest engineers recently. I know he was in the engineering program, but I want to say he's 21 now. But both of them had just shown great potential, and I think there's a little bit of trouble in our industry with not recognizing potential. And once you can get leadership that can recognize potential and push those guys ahead, we're going to make some cultural changes, and you need to show that to the public. Like, hey, look at these guys that are coming in the industry. Look at where they were. Look at where they're going now. And, it's a huge opportunity, and it's not going anywhere for now. I mean, unless the rivers dry up or something like that, which can always happen for a little bit of time, but not likely. It's this industry has to exist for the country to exist. It's why we are as big and huge and successful as we are. We have this ability to move this amount of cargo in bulk on our inland waterways. I mean, that just it has to be stated that that's just how it is, and no one knows we exist. So,
Have you heard of the Riverworks Discovery Program?
yes, I have. I've talked to them a couple of times. Like I said, I love what they do. So glad that's a step in the right direction. There's, several museums and everything that work with them. I believe, I want to say I actually covered a few things I knew of, but they're doing a great job out there. I'd like to see that expanded. Lots more community outreach is needed all over the world, and I know everybody just kind of does what they can, but yeah, they're great. I really appreciate what they're doing.
If you can, because I'm not familiar. What did happen in Louisville?
Well, there was a kind of a breakaway. I never saw the actual incident report. I believe it was a Ingram contracted boat came down and went sideways, kind of hit the point or something, broke up, barges hit the L&I bridge, barges hit the dam. And I say that was overblown because it happens a lot in the high water season. It's not a rare thing. I was just kind of looking at the Facebook comments and the groups and stuff and saying like, oh, the government's plan and all that kind of stuff, or everybody has their own opinions on why it happened. I'm like, man, this poor guy, like this wouldn't have been covered like it was unless it was they had that train derailment in Ohio and everything. Well, all of a sudden the media had to focus on all the bad of what's going on with transportation of cargo, so then they focus on this poor guy. And we're no strangers to towboat incidents. I mean, it happens. Unfortunately, it does it every now and then, and it happens to all of us. I'm not under the impression that it won't happen to me one day or somebody I know. And it was just an unfortunate day for him. It ended up okay. They were able to get the methanol barge off the dam, I believe, and get everything under control. But it does happen. I want to say that probably happens 2 or 3 times a year in those bridges. It's a place where thankful to have some of the senior experience that I've had. Guys tell me, hey, run these bridges like it's high water all the time, run them a certain way. Don't play with them, get through them, kind of deal. Now, like I said, I'm not sure what happened in that guy's case or anything. I really wouldn't want to comment on that. It's a big pain for any pilot to have an incident. And typically the hardest on that pilot is himself, including, me. I think that's one of the best worst traits of being a pilot is when you have an accident, you're hard on yourself more than anybody else can be. So no one else really gets on to you about it. And no one really tries to comment about incidents because they weren't there, and they know how hard it is for someone that takes himself seriously as a pilot to come back from those.
Before we wrap this up, man, anything else you'd like to share?
Not that I can think of. It's been a good time. Maybe we'll come back sometime. There's always something going on the river, so I'm sure we won't run out of stuff to talk about. Like I said, I hope that everything goes well with this podcast, and I hope that it continues to get popular. And I just want people to see what goes on in this industry, and that there are people out here that are not what you would think they are. It's just such a diverse industry. I've really enjoyed my time here, and I hope that if you have ever considered it, if anybody listening to this that just doesn't know if they want to try it out or not, sounds hard, sounds whatever, just do it. Just do it. Just come out, check it out. It's the worst could happen. It's done exceptionally well for me. With ACBL, they've treated me exceptionally well. I couldn't be happier for who I work for. They've been just great to me, especially with the new guys in now. They're awesome. Even with Mark Noy, I watched the show with him last time. I've spoken to him personally several times, and yeah, I've never had so many just consecutive good experiences with a company as I've had where I'm at now. And that goes throughout the industry. I mean, you really get the sense that other people care about you in this industry. Just like Captain Danny Thomas kind of taking me in as a steersman, that goes a long way. It goes a very, very long way. And this industry was built on reputation. I hope that I'm developing a good reputation, and I've always tried to be crew positive and just take care of my guys and everything. And I want that to continue in this industry, no matter how our culture changes or no matter what kind of public interest we get. I hope that we keep the traditions that we have and just expand them into better opportunities to just be good to each other. I mean, it's been a heck of a ride, and can't wait to see where it goes from here.
You think we can get Captain Danny on here?
I bet he would love to be on here.
Well, you know how to
Yeah.
reach me. See if you can line that up.
Okay, will do.
Look, I thank you for being a part of this, and I thank you for your time today.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
We'll keep in touch, man.
Roger that.